Hi everyone, welcome to my senior project, and let's get started. For my senior project, I was interested in the idea of editing a single instrument composition with software that could change the notes to a new computer-synthesized instrument of my choice, so I chose this for my senior project. My essential question is, as someone who loves music, can AI be used to create music enjoyable to everyone, and what kind of barriers does AI-generated and AI-synthesized music face in the future? One of the ways that I went about asking this question is by creating a senior project Instagram page in which people could listen to the music that I uploaded and then answer a short survey about whether or not they enjoyed that music. Now, this idea kind of came about of me first talking back and forth with my brother about different ideas that I could do, and then settling on this idea because I like to work with both music but also technology, and since I played the piano for a long time, I knew that I wanted it to be piano related, and so I thought this would be a good combination of my interests. What have I been doing for the past 3 months? Well, even though I've been working with artificial intelligence, I haven't been able to have any robot dance parties. What makes a composer's music unique? Take a second to pause this and think about this, but I'm going to answer right now. I think one of the ways that makes a composer's music unique is simply the way that they create their music. Everybody's brain works differently, and so we're all going to express ourselves in our music differently as well. But the way that I wanted to focus on was how a performer affects the music that they create, how they impart themselves onto a piece and change the dynamics of the music that they're working with. And so I wanted to be able to capture a performer and how they make the music that they're playing unique, but change the instrument of that performance, primarily with piano compositions, into something like a guitar or a violin. And so to expand on that, here's Lang Lang, and he's a very famous concert pianist. Look at the way that he moves his fingers, how he expresses himself, how his hand goes up. He didn't have to move his hand like up just to play the piece, but he did it anyway because it helped him play and express himself in a way that made the music sound better. And so these were the kind of performances that I wanted to capture. But imagine this played with something like an acoustic guitar. It's hard to imagine, but that's what I wanted to do. Here's an example of a composition that I edited. This isn't the unedited version, but it has been transcribed, and I'll go more into this in detail, but just know that this has been put through Onset and Frame software, while this one has been edited in Cakewalk software, as well as being transcribed through Onset and Frame software. Here's the original. So you should notice some minor imperfections in that, and that is because the transcription software is not perfect, and I'll go more into that in detail later as well. And here's the edited version. So I encourage you to guess the instruments within this, but I'm going to go on to them in the next slide. So the first composition simply contains a MIDI piano, and the second composition contains a choir, plus an acoustic guitar, plus a synth sound. So how did I make this? Before we go into how I made this, I want to talk about an important term to understand: artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is an attempt to replicate a human's ability to intuitively think and reason through any situation by using mathematical computation and logic. Just how humans can know to put together a puzzle the right way, or to even drive a car, artificial intelligence is attempting to understand this ability of us to figure out situations and copy that towards specific tasks that, while seemingly easy for humans, are very hard for artificial intelligence to replicate. So you've probably heard of MP3. MP3 is a very common digital audio format. This allows a computer to understand the audio that you're putting into it, because a computer doesn't have human ears to hear the audio that you put into it. It can't process it without a file encoding format that can accurately understand that audio and play it back to you through the computer. And so you need a format like this. WAV is another example of a format like MP3. It's a digital audio format, but it's a much higher quality than MP3. And so it's primarily used in transcription software like Onset and Frames. Onset and Frames is this. And what this is, first, this is the WAV audio. The WAV audio is now then being turned into the MIDI format. As you can see, going from WAV to MIDI. MIDI is Musical Instrument Digital Interface. So MIDI is a much easier to use audio format. With MIDI, I can see the notes displayed individually. I can see that there's a C in here. I can see that there's a G. I'm able to edit these notes individually in Cakewalk software. If I wanted to put WAV into Cakewalk, I would just see this long audio, and I wouldn't be able to edit it, and it would be a lot harder to work with. And so you can think of MIDI like a malleable audio format. And so we're turning WAV to MIDI by using Onset and Frame software, which predicts patterns in this audio signal. Even though it looks like relatively erratic, it actually contains many melodic patterns and forms from which our artificial intelligence looks at this and computes it to this. It's looking at patterns in this and making assumptions that, for instance, the C in this is going to be C here too. And so that's all that Onset and Frames is a transcription software that, by looking and transcribing and translating the audio in this, it turns the WAV format into the MIDI format, which is then much easier to edit in the Cakewalk software that I use. With all this in mind, the two primary programs that I worked with were Onset and Frames and Cakewalk, and these two I used for the majority of my project on basically everything that I did. Now I want to show you guys another example of a song that I created, this time being from the rap genre instead of the classical music genre. And just a quick disclaimer, this piano cover here, this was not put through Onset and Frames and then created and transcribed into a piano format. Somebody else already made a piano cover, and I used that on YouTube. That was typically how I would find songs that were not in the classical music genre in order to make edits of them. And so you cannot just plug Cardi B's WAP into Onset and Frames and expect it to create an accurately transcripted version in the MIDI format, because Onset and Frames doesn't have the capabilities in order to analyze a song like this. It's too complex. And so this is just a piano cover, and then I use that and plugged it into Onset and Frames. And this is the version that I edited in Cakewalk software. So this contains a dulcimer, a violin, and a choir as well. The other ways that I spent my time during the senior project was the first thing I did was doing a learning Python book. I spent time reading this and really trying to understand how Python worked. And I didn't end up using this information very much, mostly because I didn't create any of my own software. I instead used Onset and Frame software and tried to learn about that because it was so developed and exactly what I wanted to do that I felt like that would make a better and more interesting project than attempting to create my own software, which could have various problems. But this book did help me understand more about Python, and I think it will be useful, especially the information that I learned from it. Here are the enjoyment surveys that I was talking about earlier in my project. I had people listen to this short cover of Maple Leaf Rag, and so I'll have you guys listen to that as well. And then I edited the next one with a banjo. And this edit was before I learned how to really layer songs on top of each other and also layer tracks on top of each other, and also get a better understanding of how to work with Cakewalk editing software. So this wasn't the best composition that I created, but I still enjoyed making these ones as well. Now, the survey that came with it was sent through Harmony School by Sal, and so I got a lot of responses on this one, and I wanted to show those responses. So the first thing that I asked people is, did they enjoy listening to this song? And most people said yes, which I'm happy about. If you didn't enjoy it, well, that's too bad, but thank you for listening. And then I wanted to see what people had reasons for why they didn't enjoy the song. And so most people said none of the above. They didn't have any reason for not enjoying the song, but some people didn't like the genre. Others thought the software transcription was a little bit off, which I thought honestly more people would have this because oftentimes I found that the software transcription would be pretty inaccurate with notes. It would sound a little bit jarring, but I'm cool that it was only one person. And then some people just didn't like it, and that was okay. Now, I also asked people, did they enjoy listening to the edited version more than the original? And 9 people were indifferent, 9 people said yes, and 13 people said no. And this kind of reflects a general trend, which is like people were interested in these songs that I were creating, but they needed to be higher quality and better transcripted in order for people to really resonate with them. And I think my project was kind of entering that uncanny valley where the music I created was like something that you could have heard before, but it was also something that you had never heard before because these compositions couldn't be played with these instruments before. And so, yeah, I thought the comments that people gave were really interesting and helped get me gain some insight about how people felt about the project. And then I also got some comments from people. One person said, "It's definitely weird to listen to such a complex piano song, repped for banjo. Could a picker play that fast?" No, it probably couldn't. Also, left-hand harmony sounded weird and kind of unreal. If this came from anybody but you, I probably would have said I didn't enjoy it. Well, if you know me, I'm willing to take any criticism, and so if you didn't like it, go ahead and say it. But thank you for your comment. And then another person said, "The first is such an iconic song. Listening to the MIDI interpretation was very interesting for such a complex piece with many layers. It was a wonderful composition." And so I love this dichotomy between one person who clearly didn't enjoy as much, but one person who was very interested. And so that kind of reflected what I saw in this project, is that people were interested in this, but they needed more oomph. They needed a special, the compositions had to be better in order for people to really see what this artificial intelligence software had to offer. As I said, I spent a lot of my time not just working with the On-Center Frames software. I also spent my time coding. And coding was going to play a bigger role in my project, and I did spend a lot of hours on this. And this is because I wanted to set up On-Center Frames locally on my computer. I was running it on Google Colab on Google, and so I had to go to Google every time I wanted to upload a song, and it took a long time. So I thought that if I set it up natively on my computer, first, it would be a good learning experience, which it was, and second, I would then hopefully streamline some of the process. And so I did end up setting it up on my computer. First, I worked with Visual Studio Code to set it up, and that didn't really work too well, so I switched to Linux Ubuntu. And these are just developing art environments for those who don't know. And so I switched to Linux Ubuntu and tried to get the code working, and essentially how you get a code like Magenta working, and specifically On-Center Frames, you have to get a bunch of smaller packages, and these packages have various codes that, when run together, allow you to run the software as a whole, allow you to run the On-Center Frames software. But I wasn't sure how to set up all these packages, and so I ran into a lot of problems setting them up. And then when it came that I had assembled the packages correctly, I was missing something. I was missing a data set. And so the neural networks that predict for this transcription, they need a MIDI data set, or a musical playlist, as you will, to train on. They look at that playlist, and they listen to the playlist, the artificial intelligence does, and it understands more about classical music and how to accurately transcribe that music and create better transcriptions. And so if it doesn't have a data set from which it can recognize the classical music from that you're putting into it, it's just going to create a jumbled mess of audio, or you're not going to be able to create any audio. And so I wasn't able to set up the On-Center Frames software until I figured out that I needed a data set. And then when I did set it up, I put in a really low quality data set. It was only, I think, 8 gigabytes, and so it was very small. And so it didn't create a very good result. Here, let me show you. Yeah, we don't need to listen to that anymore. When I heard that, I was kind of just, what is going on? But when I realized that my data set was too small, if you think about it, when a person listens to music, you're not going to have a good ear for the music you listen to unless you listen to a lot. And so the artificial intelligence is just like a person. It needs a good amount of music to base its assumptions on, or it's not going to create a good transcription. And so that was the problem I was running into. But I was just happy that I was able to set up On-Center Frames on my computer locally. And then from that, I stopped working on this and started to work on other facets of my project. One thing that was really important were these YouTube videos about music theory. Andrew Hong had a video called Learning Music Theory in Half an Hour. And these videos were very intense and focused, but they really helped me think through my ideas about music theory, because music theory played a central role in this project, even though it's kind of hidden beneath the surface. And so this really helped me understand more about music theory and how it works with technology. And so these videos were really informative to me. I also wrote an opinion piece about artificial intelligence and the future of it, and I'm going to make this available to all you guys after this senior project video. So here are my hours. I spent a lot of time coding within Python, and that was just dealing with all the bugs that I was dealing with. I spent 20 hours working in Philadelphia, and that was my first working with onset and frames and then learning the Python book. And then the rest of the time just kind of came out like this, whether it was writing the opinion piece or uploading the audio synthesized music and creating surveys. I always tried to find something to do to keep myself busy and engaged in my project. Special thanks to my mentor, Yang An. He was very helpful, even though he says he didn't do much. He really helped out with my project to have somebody to talk to who has experience with artificial intelligence and computer science. He was a big help, and I have to thank him a lot. While I'm here, I also have to thank Patrick Murphy for lending me his microphone. I'm using it right now, and it's helping me to record a much better sounding version of my voice. So thank you, Patrick. This is a song that I made that Yang An liked. And I wanted to show you guys this because this was one of the first examples of me layering tracks on top of themselves 3 times in order to kind of create instrumental backgrounds for the compositions that I created. So here's the original. And this is the version that I edited. Now, you might think that that sounds like a James Bond movie soundtrack, but it's actually from a show called Cowboy Bebop, and this soundtrack is called Tank. The instruments here are a drum, a violin played in the style of pizzicato, and so that's the violin strings are plucked instead of the normal way. And then it also contains a trumpet as well. So in conclusion, AI can create music that is enjoyable to people, but until the software improves, it's relegated to more of a novelty. I think that those who take advantage of the software, especially in the future, are going to be those who can really create music that pushes the boundaries of what's been created before. But there's still a lot of improvement with this software, and there's a barrier to entry for those who don't have programming experience. And so I think that this software still has a lot of time and work to improve, but when it gets there, it's going to be very interesting. I'm not quite finished yet. You think I would end without showing you myself playing? No way. Here's an edited version of me playing Fantasy Impromptu. So that was the original, and this is the edited version in which I just added a slight improvement to the piano. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to my project. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found maybe a new interest in artificial intelligence or music in general. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.